let me open the floor for discussions now. Please introduce yourself and identify the particular panelist that you have a query for, or if you want to leave it open, do indicate that. I've already counted 4, and all from my left. My right is surprisingly. Shouldn't I be? US elections, I should.
Gender balance.
Sorry. Okay, so let me start from the last table on the left. Yes, sir, please.
Okay, thank you for the thank you for all the panelists for the insightful sharing. And my name is William. I'm the president for RSI's China Alumni Association from NTU. Yeah, so today my question is goes slightly beyond the topic today. So my question is, I would like to ask Professor Sanjay and Ambassador Curtis Chi. According to the statistics, the Indian diaspora in US is more successful than the Chinese diaspora in US in terms of the numbers of the senior positions they are holding in the private sector. This could be due to the personality difference or the cultural difference or like language barriers. As the saying goes that Indians are more high profile and the Chinese are more conservative and low profile. So what's your opinion? Why there is such a difference? Thank you.
Right, thank you. So maybe I'll start with Professor Chakravorty and then come to Ambassador.
Yeah, I don't think it has anything to do with personality or race or the Indians in America were a very selected group. There were we call it a triple selection process. There are 2 selection processes in India. One is kind of historic. There's a the upper and dominant castes that have historically received education, and that becomes sort of eligible to be picked by the skill-based selection that the US immigration system does, right? So for instance, we estimate that something like 5% of the Indian population, the upper and dominant caste, constitutes somewhere around 45% of Indians in America. Whereas the bottom third of the Indian social hierarchy constitute less than 2% of Indians in America. So they were selected to succeed. And one of the chapters has the title called Selected to Succeed. It has nothing to do with personality. There's a famous book from a couple of years ago about the personality characteristics of migrants, and I think it's bunkum. We think it's bunkum, we should speak in the plural. And one of the things about the Chinese is interesting, what we found, which I didn't know going into this project, is that there's Chinese and there's Chinese, right? There's the mainland Chinese and there's the Taiwanese. The second most successful group, immigrant group in the US is Taiwanese. Indians are number 1, Taiwanese are number 2. The Chinese and the Taiwanese are very similar to Indians, very educated, very skilled, in high-skilled professions, doing well-paid jobs, entrepreneurs, business starters, the same profile that you see for Indians. The mainland Chinese, Fujian shows up for mainland Chinese, it's a much more of a mixed bag. They come through family reunification, very much less from the skilled immigrant quota. So it is the US immigration system that is the filter that is constituting these particular populations. And it is that filter that you have to pay attention to, not so much the people's or their characteristics.
Thank you.
You know, it's interesting, it's all about perspective. You know, one of the battles in the US, like California recently, is will we fund disaggregation of data? Meaning sometimes you'll see data and it's all lumped to Asian Americans. And there's this myth of the so-called model minority where, you know, you have advantages because you're Asian. But when you break down the data, you'll see some of our populations doing less well are Hmong or Lao Americans who are really having a difficult time, but they're all lumped together. So one thing I would always say is, how do we define success? Is it simply because, well, the average income of this ethnicity is 102,000, while this ethnicity is 80,000? I'm not so sure about that. But indeed, I do see more visible Indian American CEOs, and above and beyond Silicon Valley, we just had our Milken Institute Asia Summit, and coming in was Indra Nuri, who's been CEO of Pepsi, I don't know, for 10 years, you can watch the video online. But it was interesting because she talked about her experience, and there were parts about, my Indian mom was like this, but you didn't feel, well, wow, that's the Indian diaspora. This is just a very successful executive regardless of her gender or her ethnicity. And so I think sometimes we're too captured by, are you representative of your ethnicity, versus being a successful business person or government official or whatever. But I do see, and this goes back to the selection process, English is very clearly the language of business in America. I mean, look at the data for Chinese Americans, other Asian Americans, often English is not the language they use at home, right? And so that will change over time. And listening to this whole conversation, thinking about diasporas, I also thought, there is a generational issue too. As a Chinese, an Indian, or whatever, becomes third or fourth generation, maybe they think about them less as wherever their grandparents or great-grandparents came from, although they will still appreciate their culture and their heritage. But it's a very different perspective than someone who's more recently come over, still with significant ties back home.
Thank you, Master Chin. What I'll do is that now I notice that we are warming up and hands are coming up from different sides. So for better coordination, let me take the first bunch of hands that have been raised for their questions, and I'll start with Mr. P.S. Suryanarayan, and we will collect the questions and come back to the panelists.
I'm Surya from the Institute of South Asian Studies. This is addressed to Master Chin. I just wanted to know, now that we are on the subject of the Chinese Americans and Indian Americans, what kind of differentiation is there in political preferences as well as in terms of role or influence in presidential politics as between the Chinese Americans, the Taiwanese included, and the Indian Americans? And the second question is to Professor Chakravorty. There was a time when everyone said, almost universally, that the civil nuclear deal between US and India was, in some ways engineered by the Indian Americans. And going forward, do you think the Indian Americans will be in a position to influence the next president on issues such as H-1B visas, etc.? Thank you.
You can understand how hopeful Mr. Suryanarayan is. Mr. Anish Mishra.
Okay, my question is regarding the Indian diaspora. Okay, we see that recently India is, they are linking up.
Anish, sorry, yes. Any particular panelist?
Anyone in the panel can answer, yes.
Please.
Okay, so I was saying is that we see India, they are trying to link up with their diaspora, and as they do that, the Indians in America, they realize that, okay, after so many years, they realize that they are Indian. And then this thing, and then India may actually use this to their advantage to actually lobby its growth to their national interest. And then what I would like to know is that, do you see this may actually cause the US to have a very Indo-centric outlook towards the world, especially South Asia? My second question is that, okay, as we talk about the US presidential election, we must also see that the election is not only for the president, but for the entire Congress itself. And this year, because the Republicans have 24 seats up for grabs, while the Democrats have 10, and it's quite highly likely that the Democrats may actually capture the Congress. So how do you think that the Indian diaspora may gain from a democratic-controlled Congress? My third question is directly to Mr. Sanjeev Sanyal.
I'm sorry. Please.
Okay, sure.
Only two, if you don't mind. Thank you. Professor.
Thank you very much. My question is for Professor Sanjay Chakravorty. In terms of American voting behavior, the standard model is to think of people in terms of long-term party identification, and in a given election, that party identification helps us predict electoral outcomes in terms of transition from strong Republican identification to weak Republican identification, and the same with the Democratic identification. That's the American voting behavior model. My question to you is, in this particular election, those long-term party identification are melting. So how American, this is the national American trend. Now, how American is the Indian diaspora in America? Are they also melting, or are they holding strongly to their long-term party identification?
Thank you, Prof. Just one more, Roger.
Yeah, my question is for Sanjay and possibly Ambassador Curtin. Sanjay, you were saying that the numbers of the Indian diaspora are so minuscule and concentrated in the blue states that they don't really have much of an effect in the swing states like Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, etc. So is the influence, if electorally the Indian vote, the Indian diaspora vote does not count, is it only in the lobbies in Washington that's where the Indian diaspora can make its effect felt through their financial muscle as well as their lobbying?
Thank you, Roger. And I think the perils of being the only person in the room who is actually going to vote and having worked on a project of Indian diaspora in the US are obvious. All the questions are for the two of you. So things might change, but as of now, you have to democratically divide between yourselves because there are common questions. So maybe, Ambassador?
Yeah, I have data from this year about like party identification of Chinese Americans versus Indian Americans. It's funny, when I say Indian Americans, I'm thinking like Asian Indians, and then there's American Indians. But so the data I have is that for Asian Indians, so the Indians we're talking about, 53% have registered by party Democrat, 37% are independent, and 7% are Republican. Chinese was very interesting. Chinese, still a big difference between Democrat and Republican, but primarily independent. So Chinese Americans, 30% Democrat, 7% Republican, but 61% non-affiliated, right? But then when you also looked at the data, still I think 70% of those Chinese Americans, regardless of their affiliation, are probably for the Democratic candidate, Hillary Clinton, and all.
Yeah, interestingly, Ambassador, that's the only set of numbers I wrote down in preparation for this thing. Yeah, the Indians and Chinese do behave differently in terms of political behavior in the US, or people of Indian and Chinese origin. One of the things, since the discussion has, I think justifiably moved out of the narrow range identified in the headline topic, I feel it's fair to talk about the influence of the diaspora, which I think a number of people really want to talk about. Not this particular tawdry election, but generally. And the civil nuclear deal was indeed midwifed by Indian Americans. It's now widely seen that way. And one of the things that, one of the ways in which Indian Americans have political influence, despite being small in numbers, and despite being concentrated in blue states, is through lobbying, certainly, through reputational externalities, primarily by being seen to be influential, powerful, having access. There's some serious giving, monetary giving that's taking place. And we actually see that the political future, if we were to kind of prognosticate in terms of the political behavior of Indians in America, we would see it much less in terms of them at the presidential level in the US. We see it at the local level, running for the state senates, like running for Congress seats. Something is going to happen in this election that's a first, which is the first Indian American in the Senate. Kamala Harris from California is going to win. I mean, this is one of the things you know. And she is half Indian and half, actually she's 3/4 Indian, 1/4 Jamaican. And she's very much in the Hillary camp. And this is a first. We expect to see more of this happening. We expect to see Congress people getting elected. We expect to see state senators and state level decision makers getting elected. So that is one level. So this level, the presidential level, may not be the right scale at which to look at things. One needs to look down. But the other scale at which we think it's kind of important to look at things is the transnational scale. A number of people actually have talked about transnationalism, the global circulation of the elite, and people who get to meet in rooms like this, rooms more exclusive than this, and rooms even more exclusive than this one, right? And who kind of exchange ideas. And in those rooms, there are Indians, more and more. In those rooms, there are people whose voices are heard. And we believe that these people not only have an influence on the global circulation of product, if you will, of the movement of what is made where, and where value is added in the world. Not only do these people sit as on boards and as presidents in the financial system of the world, really, which really direct ultimately the flows of capital and the construction of jobs and employment. But these people also have a place in not just in the public events like Prasar Bharati Divas, but they have access to not just the Modi government, but the previous Manmohan Singh government. And once again, the reputational externalities of leading Indians, not just in the US, but from other parts of the world, including Singapore, tends to create policies or policy twists or just a little curlicues that may not be earth-shattering, but over the long run, using kind of ideas from chaos theory, may have far more influence than the big ticket items that we frequently pay attention to. In order to answer the specific question that you asked, which I think the ambassador kind of addressed, there is a shift of party loyalty, and unlike Sanjeev, you have a prognostication, and you may very well be correct about your prognostication, but as of now, it's turning the other way. This campaign, as you well know, is not unlike any that we've seen before. It is turned off any number of people. Whether those loyalties are long-term, we don't know. Because certainly the economic interest of the upper class should seem to align with Republicans. And any number of Republicans have said this over and over again. Why aren't you voting with us? And the Indian...
Evangelism is definitely a part of it.
I'm sorry?
Evangelism is a very...
Oh, definitely. And they over and over again they say, that's because your party base is kind of white and kind of xenophobic, and it doesn't like us, and the religion aspect. Is the Republican Party going to change that? What remains of the party then? I'm sorry, I may be offending people by narrowcasting the Republican Party, but in order for those loyalties to change, the character of the party, the nature of the party might have to change. And in the foreseeable future, I don't see that happening. I don't know what Trump is going to do to the party. There might be a schism. I don't know what this phenomenon is going to end up. There might be a split in the party. Many people expect a split to happen in the party.
I guess, two key points. In terms of Indian Americans moving up, being in political office, again, I would disagree with you on many points, but particularly the one where you said for Bobby Jindal or Nikki Haley to be legitimate, that they had to change their religion. I disagree completely. Well, let me finish. And so I think every candidate running for a state office is trying to think through how do they get the most votes. But I don't know them, right? But I can't think that a matter of faith is simply for elective office. There are many other factors. I don't know how they were raised and all. That would be one point I would just say. But very clearly, when we look at even the rise of Indian American, I have so many, it's just with some friends in India, and like the stereotype, my friends, Indian Americans in New York, are so liberal. And so we talk about why aren't Indian Americans getting elected? Sometimes, like Chinese, they don't want to run. They're really successful in business, or they have their own business. Why am I going to make no money and everyone criticizes you run for office, right? You know, I can succeed in a different way. But it's very interesting when I raised both the governor, Haley, and Bobby Jindal. They almost like wanted to disown them. Those aren't the right Indian Americans that are running. Nonetheless, Bobby Jindal became the very first Asian American, not even just Indian American, to run for presidency. You see, he didn't succeed, but he was the first on either ticket. And Nikki Haley was very much considered to be the vice president of the U.S. by many of those nominees that didn't succeed against Donald Trump. And so for me, success for any diaspora is not being stereotyped as Republican or Democrat and all, so that when they're trying to get their policies across, politicians don't take them for granted. And so for any diaspora, I always say to them, because I talk to a lot of groups in the US, what is it that you want your elected official to do? It's hard to have influence when you don't know what you want. And there's this vague, well, we're against racism, we're against this, we're for that. But what is it that you specifically want? And so when you understand a legislative process, you understand I want a piece of legislation, or I want to be protected. It was very interesting to look at the breakdown of this Asian American National Survey on policy positions for Asian Americans. What they wanted were things that many Americans wanted, but slanted more towards really more Bernie Sanders in many ways than Hillary Clinton. 70% of Indian Americans very much for Obamacare, right? 69% wanted more aid to attend college. A funny one that was very different than the rest of the population, Indian Americans were less likely to support legalization of marijuana than other parts of the population. But here are the very clear policy positions that these groups wanted. And so how you get heard is then the next issue.
Thank you, Ambassador. Subhomoy, you wanted to add some?
You know, beyond the question of who's voting for who, the major trend in world politics now is globalization or the response to globalization. Brexit is an evidence of what London wanted and the rest of England didn't want. I'm not sure other countries, including a mighty country like even USA, will not have to face this issue. How diaspora votes, and it's not about Indian diaspora, Chinese diaspora, Mexican diaspora, it's about how respective governance structures of countries respond to this challenge, which, as Richie talked about as the immigration question, is at the cornerstone of A, democratic societies, B, the continuance of the world order as we see it, and third, the acceptability of those countries in pursuing policies which lead to general enrichment. Each individual obviously votes depending on her or his particular proclivities, and I wouldn't get into issues of religion. The broad point is that USA, as the standard bearer of globalization, the debate in this election has veered away, which Ambassador talked about, from these major issues which resonated till very recently at the last elections. And I think that is the danger. The fact that they're not engaging with people outside is what should be worrying us, and I think that is what I take away from this round of US elections, to say that that is actually a step back not only for USA but also possibly for the global order.
Thank you. So the next round, please. Yes, sir there, and then you, and then Dipender.
Good evening, Your Excellency, distinguished guests. Thank you for the insights. This is a question for Professor Sanjay and Mr. Sanyal. I mean, why is Christianity a turnoff? Why is Christianity a turnoff in this election when the Clintons and Mr. Obama are professing Christians, and Trump, if he wants to say he was a Christian, he'll be laughed off the stage. So why is this issue? Is it a deeper issue of the wars being manifested in the Republican Party and values and flow of it, or what? So please elaborate, sir.
Thank you. Let's collect the questions. We have exactly 7 minutes to go, so we'll need to make it short, but I assure that I'll take all the questions. Yes, please. Good.
Yeah, my name is Sridhar Mukherjee. I run shipping business. My name is Sridhar Mukherjee. I run shipping business. And basically, it is in line with what Professor Chakravorty was telling, that there is a possibility of 2 of the people of Indian origin who may be coming to the Senate. But I think the questions such as H-1B visa, etc., are far beyond it possibly, because even if they are there, if Mr. Trump thinks that it's the other way around, he'll have his support depending on who has the majority, whether it is the Democrat or Republican. That's the basic question. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. Dipender?
Thank you. My name is Dipender and I'm with the Institute of South Asian Studies. If I were of Hispanic origin, my interest would certainly lead me to vote for a particular candidate in this particular election. However, as an Indian American, I'm just curious to hear what are the issues that would lead, could you delineate the issues that would lead me to a particular candidate as opposed to my politics as an American? I'm basically alluding to whether I'm progressive or conservative. Of course, there's a state senator in the state of Washington who came with a very progressive agenda, a recent immigrant, who argued and won with an overwhelming majority, argued for $15 minimum wages and very progressive legislation in this state.
Thank you. I don't see any more hands, so please don't raise any more. What I'll do is that I'll ask one question from my side. I mean, this is going to be a bit naive or superficial or a motherhood kind of question. I assume that when one looks at a big country like the US, which has people from all over the world coming and settling down there, these immigrant populations, to an extent, the perceptions of these populations, about these populations from the original population's point of view, get influenced by their respective country leaderships. So say, for example, I mean, this is a view, when one looks at the Chinese population, the mainland Chinese population in the United States of America, the fact that President Xi Jinping is the president of China might have a view to make so far as the perception of these occurs. And my short question is that, has Prime Minister Modi's becoming Prime Minister of India made a difference to the perception of the Indian diaspora in the US in the eyes of the originals from the United States of America? I take it as the last question. What I'll do is, purely in an orderly fashion, I'll start from Sanjeev. Please don't take more than 2 minutes each, so that we can cover this whole round.
But do we have to answer any of the earlier questions?
Okay. That one and anything else you want to add.
Okay. And there was a question about why Christianity is an issue. Christianity isn't. Evangelist Christianity is, particularly because the Hindus and the Buddhists and Sikhs and others as well, but particularly Hindus are subjected to a great deal of pressure from evangelical groups as being pagans. And so this is a continuous issue that irritates the Indian community quite substantially. And one of the reasons that people like Bobby Jindal, for example, are seen consequently as a bit of sellouts to that process, and therefore are disliked by the Indian community. And incidentally, the American politician who is most popular with the Indian American community is not even Indian. She's a lady called Tulsi Gabbard, who is a Samoan, but who professes openly, follows Hinduism. So religion is an important, and more broadly, not just religion, but more cultural issues are an important driving force of the consciousness that has developed. That's why I mentioned specifically the issue about the California textbook case. So I think that is kind of important. Now, having said that, the issue about whether Prime Minister Modi did make a difference, I think it's self-reinforcing. This consciousness was anyway building up. It is a consciousness that, incidentally, as I mentioned, is happening in many other parts of the world. It is happening because of a number of reasons. One is that Indians become richer, India is doing well, so there's a certain confidence. I think social media and information technology particularly have had a big role in interconnecting a whole bunch of people who would otherwise have been in isolated groups. There has also been, over time, a much more solidified Indian, what shall I say, identity. If you went back a couple of generations, being Indian was the sum of its parts. So you were Bengali and consequently an Indian, Tamil and consequently an Indian, and so on. So this was an additive process. I'm not saying that they weren't proudly Indian. I mean, many of these communities fought for the Indian independence and so on. But it was an additive process. What has happened, even in India, but also outside of India, is that the Indian identity has now overridden the regional identities to a large extent, partly because of intermarriage, mixing of various kinds. So all of these together created a situation where the arrival of Prime Minister Modi kind of ignited it in some fashion.
Right. Thank you. I think that's very useful. Yeah, Sanjeev?
Right, so let me first start with a question which was about Narendra Modi. So I think in terms of more overt, explicit focus on overseas Indians, the diaspora, if you will, Narendra Modi has made that into an art form. I mean, when you look at the rock star shows that have been held, so both in the context of the influence of that as well as building the confidence and the identity, if you will, of the people, I think they have gone hand in hand together with confidence in the Indian economy. So all of these things have played a part. I just wanted to quickly touch upon globalization, that point that came up. It has gone through interesting manifestations. When I look at the US, in the early stages, globalization meant basically the American companies having access to the global market. But as the other companies started coming into the US, so the sensitivity about outsourcing as an example, so when it starts coming into your market, then the definitions start changing. So we are going through an interesting phase, but we have pretty much every country, even in the Brexit equation. So it is, UK would want to have access to the European market, but some amount of protectionism probably is preferred. So we are probably going to enter into new equations where globalization might not mean quite what it theoretically is supposed to mean. On a lighter note, I just wanted to comment that it's interesting to see in the panel how big the Bengali diaspora is. A couple of the other guys notwithstanding, I'm an honorary Bengali because of my Calcutta connection. So Curtis, I think through the process of osmosis, you're also a Bengali now.
You've changed faith. Thank you. Someone told me I was a Punjabi. Hey, just one or two things. I just spoke at a conference in Mumbai. I was a guest of the Ministry of External Affairs. And it was interesting because at my table, there were some similar questions. But they said, are there lessons that you learned from Israel in the US about Israel's influence? The Jewish population is also very small, 1%, I don't know what the figure is, but really a disproportionate influence, but also very concentrated in certain states and certain cities. So it isn't just a geographic issue, is it a money issue, is it a connection issue, or is it the reality? These populations are so long, they're seen as Americans, and yet they've stuck together in some ways to advocate for certain things. And so it goes to, what are they advocating for? Are they advocating for Israel? Or are they advocating for other kinds of policy changes? So if I were in the US speaking to like Indian Americans and we had this conversation, I would of course encourage them to vote and be politically active. But can you come together and be for something, or are you like, most Americans are divided too? And so I think as any diaspora evolves, it's not necessarily a bad thing that they can't come together on some things. If it reflects what they're really concerned about is, can I get a better school for my kid? Can I get a better job? Yes, I like trade. And so for me, when I think about all these diaspora issues, one of the challenges in America right now is we move more and more towards identity politics, because maybe that's how you're going to get elected. But then once you get elected, how do I rule is the issue that I worry about.
Thank you, Ambassador. Subhomoy, why don't you come in now? I'll leave the final words to Professor Chakravorty.
True. Purely just a hypothesis, I think this is going to be a tight election, so every vote will count. It might be the single vote, as Kevin Costner said, for a divided election, in which case then every vote, including that of diaspora and everything, will count. But that's crystal ball gazing. About the Modi issue, this government, the Indian government, doesn't particularly have, and rightly so, any views on what would be happening in USA. But what they look at as a force multiplier to the Indian diaspora there is to work backwards with India to push the Indian interest. So the pressure is actually on the Modi government from the diaspora that you have raised expectations, so what are the things that you can do to satisfy it? So it works on the reverse flow rather than building as a force multiplier. Because force multiplier in any case given, and it's expected. Generally, Indians have worked in the lobbies. Now it's much more heightened, but then this government also is more sophisticated, so it doesn't just depend on those lobbies. So that's my short point.
Thank you.
Let me see if I can be coherent about this. Probably not. That's right, that's the trouble. Begin with Modi. I think we need perspective, and that's what we're trying to do over here, right? And we all come from slightly different angles looking at the same object, right? And it's no wonder we are seeing different things. So there is an idea of Modi in Madison Square Garden, right? Which is consumed in India, which is consumed in Singapore. That idea is consumed. And there's a reality of Modi in Madison Square Garden, and I will claim a right to that reality. And I will end, I'm trying to end on a slightly uncertain tone, which is that it was more than an Indian event, it was a Gujarati event. And Sanjeev, I sort of disagree with you, and I'm kind of finding ways in which I can capture the ambassador's words and kind of lead this to a rather complex notion of identity. Language matters a lot. For Indians, language matters a lot. One of the things we've tried to study is language retention. You know, which community actually teaches its children its language. Can you guess among the Indian languages which languages actually get retained and which don't? Which get retained? Gujarati does and Punjabi does. And Telugu, Tamil, Bengali, Marathi don't. Now, there's a story in there, there's an anthropological story that kind of needs to be followed up on that we haven't done. So there's a language identity, there's a class identity, there's a professional identity, there is a generational identity. So the 1.5 generation, the second generation. There's a political identity. And none of these, now we are getting into identities that aren't really fixed, right? They kind of are shape-shifting. And what we want at this point, or sometimes what we want to do analytically, is kind of put a fix on things and take a snapshot of the situation as it is. As long as we recognize the snapshot for what it is, that it is a snapshot, that things will change. You can theorize some of it, and you probably can't theorize all of it. we would then have to admit that all the possibilities we discussed are possible. Some are more probable than others. But the ways in which identity is going to get worked out through globalization, social media, interconnectivity, language retention, political identity, Trump and Clinton and Obama and Obamacare and other policies and IT and H-1B. I honestly don't know. I do recognize diversity. There's enormous diversity. Right now the politics may be coalescing. That's because this is a very polarized election. In a less polarized situation, identities may shift, positions may shift. And I would like to keep that space for diversity in identity open.
Thanks. Let's end on a slightly light note. As expected, there was not a single good word told about Mr. Trump in this discussion. I'm not sure whether he knows that in Delhi, for the last 6 months, prayers are being offered in a very prominent part of New Delhi for his success in the US presidential elections. I won't say why those people offering the prayers want him to succeed, but for the last 6 months, it's going on. That's also an Indian diaspora support, I would say, for him. We are not done yet. Let me have the pleasure of inviting Professor Subrata Mitra, Director ISAS, to kindly deliver the closing remarks. And Prof, we are desperately running out of time, so I think 3 minutes is what you probably have.
That's less than the 90 minutes I'm used to. Excellencies, dignitaries, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's my privilege and very great pleasure as Director ISAS to move a vote of thanks, and with the honorable exception of Ambassador Curtis and possibly Sanjay, this is the only voting you're going to do today. But in order for you to vote yes to my motion, to give you a good reason as to why we should do it, look, on the panel we have people who have traveled a very long way, or some from not so long way, to be with us, but these are very busy people, very important people, and ISAS offers nothing except friendship, respect, and possibly a few books. Now, why are these people doing it? And why is this audience, which is equally busy, here to be with us? That's what this vote is about. Singapore is a knowledge economy, and this election and its implications for the Indian diaspora are among issues that affect us all. And that is the takeaway from this conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, 40 years ago I was a student in the United States. Unlike Chairman, my election was the honorable defeat of George McGovern. Many of us had worked for him. But this is a very different kind of election. Sanjay mentioned it towards the end. It's a polarizing election where the very basis of the diaspora is being questioned. Now, what gives the traction to the diaspora? It's the same thing which gives Singapore traction. A level playing field. And level playing field to talent is what the United States is about. It's a very deceptive society. On the surface, you'll be asked, how smart are you, how much will you charge? So one is colorblind. But underneath is a plural society which allows you to be as Telugu or as Bengali or as Muslim, within limits, of course, as you want to be. This election is challenging it. Regardless of who wins, it is now on the American agenda, and it's not going to go away. And that is what is striking at the very root of the diaspora and of all of us, not just the Indian diaspora, but the knowledge network which connects Singapore to the South Asian diaspora. And that is the takeaway from this election. And why is ISAS doing it? ISAS is about South Asian states, from Afghanistan, Pakistan, all the way from Nepal, Bhutan, Bangladesh, India, of course, until you go to Maldives. Are we also present in the United States? The answer comes from my respected colleague, Ambassador Chaudhary. In a recent article published by us, he says, South Asia is not just about South Asian states or South Asian people. So we have to go where our people go, and like snails, they carry their little homes with them. And that's why, ladies and gentlemen, the conversation is legitimately a part of our ISA's mandate, and it's our offering to Singapore, which sustains us, and to the Singapore tax dollar. So, if you agree with me and you want to vote yes, join me to applaud the panelists and the audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor. Jordan, anything we are left to be done with? All done? Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much and have a very good evening and come back to future ISAS events. Thank you so much.